Hello, everybody. I can see people joining us now, so we will give everybody a few minutes and then we will start. I don't know where you are all based. I'm in London. It's not a bad day here. Lucy, where are you?
I'm in London too, and I'm sleeping all right.
Yeah, Elaine?
I'm in Edinburgh and it's not raining.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah, unusual.
Yeah, fantastic. That's great. Yeah, I'm looking forward to a nice weekend, I must say. I think the weather forecast is better, so that's always good. News has been interesting, has it not, over the last week or so with the report that was launched. Tragic, sad and appalling. Not much more I can say about that, really. I'll come on to it shortly. Yeah, no, not a good situation at all for us women.
Although evidence that women speaking together can make real change, which I found the only inspiring thing about the Mesh story has been that sort of shining light of women, especially women of a certain age, finally being heard.
Yeah,
and that's sort of...
Yeah, absolutely. I agree with you.
Something to grab onto in these... I have to grab onto anything positive I can see in the news and sort of hold it like a...
Yeah, numbers are going up still. So I think we'll just wait 20 seconds or more, and then I think we'll start if you're all happy with that. Yeah, I think that we should start. So hello, good afternoon, and thank you everybody for joining us today. I'm Janet Lindsay and I run the UK's only women's health research charity, covering all aspects of women's health. I'm absolutely thrilled to welcome Luce Brett, author of PMSL, or How I Literally Piss Myself Laughing and Survived the Last Taboo to Tell the Tale, and also Elaine Miller, a women's health physiotherapist. It really couldn't be more timely to have this health and wellbeing webinar today, as we've all been reading. The media's full of the details of Baroness Cumberledge's report, tragic stories covering the intense suffering endured by women for got too long to even think about, really. And this is all relating to vaginal mesh, sodium valproate and the pregnancy test. The sad thing is that it's highlighted the culture again where doctors were oblivious to the risks to women, and they were also unwilling to listen. Women again were ignored and left to suffer in silence, and in fact many of them have gone on to have their lives ruined by the effects of the treatment. The good thing is, and we must take some good things from this, the 277-page report has 9 recommendations. We obviously, all of us, really hope that these recommendations will not be ignored and that they will be taken up. So can I implore everybody to do everything you can to canvass support amongst your network of friends, family and work colleagues. We really need, ladies and gentlemen, to take control of our own health and look after ourselves, and just simply not settle for anything less than best. Not just for us, but for generations to come. So if you're worried about anything, go and see the doctor. Take your concerns and worries to your GP. Don't be brushed aside. And for women particularly, don't be told that it's just women's troubles and put up with it. That is not good enough anymore. So what can I tell you of well-being of women? Well, we fund early research across the breadth of women's health. We're unique, we're one of a kind, and that should be a positive, and it is, but it's actually extraordinary that we are unique and one of a kind, considering we make up 51% of the population. So women's health, as we always say, isn't just locked into having babies, but it covers everything at every stage of life. So women's cancers to health issues like endometriosis, heavy periods, menopause, incontinence, as well as fertility issues, pregnancy and birth complications. So it's even more extraordinary that as little as 2.1% of publicly funded research is actually spent on women's reproductive health and childbirth to find new treatments, tests and preventions. And here are just a few ways that well-being of women's research is impacting women every day. So folic acid supplements, the HPV vaccine, ultrasound in pregnancy, new ways to support women going through the menopause, and this leads me very neatly back to why we're here today, Botox to treat some types of incontinence. All started with well-being of women's research, and we've got lots more. Please go to our website. It's a new website. We're very proud of it, and you can find out all about our research. You can find out about us, what we do, and also, most importantly, how you can donate. And that's important because we get no government funding for our research. And because of the pandemic, our income is down nearly 50%, which means that we will not be able to fund as much research as we would like to. And I can tell you every year when we get our applications in, we get far more in than we can afford to actually fund. So we want to see women helping each other by actually funding some of that research ourselves. Now, I'm shortly going to hand over to Lucy and Elaine for what I know is going to be a hilarious conversation, because we've done some little trials already, and in fact we had to call a halt to them. They were so funny. But before I do, let me tell you a little bit about each of them. Lucy is a journalist and a blogger. She learned all about her nether regions, as she calls it, from magazines, other people's big sisters, and Tampax leaflets. Without serious warning of the possibility, she became incontinent after the birth of her first child. She's become a very, very respected spokesperson on the issue that affects 1 in 3 women. And I'm going to come back to this point actually in a moment, because you know, the facts and figures around women's health are staggering. She's spoken about her condition in the media. She's obviously written her book, and she is just an all-round fabulous champion for women's health. Elaine is a physiotherapist specializing in pelvic health. She is passionate about leaky ladies and keeping vaginas up where they belong, and is hilarious about it. Elaine is a fellow of the Chartered Society of Physiotherapy. She uses humor so cleverly to bust the taboos around incontinence, prolapse, and women's health generally. She's collaborating on some research examining whether humor is an effective health promotion tool. She's presented at the Scottish Parliament in Westminster, speaks regularly, and she's chairing a group of stakeholders for Health Education England to build a framework for the new role of postnatal specialists. So ladies, I am now going to hand over to you both to take us through what I know is just going to be very funny. Thank you.
Thank you, Janet.
Yes.
When we're at the O2, you can do the introductions.
Yes.
Quick plug for Lucy's book.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, you've not had it in the thing. So why did you write the book, Lucy?
Well, I think that the best way to summarise that is that I finally reached a point in my life where I was more furious and annoyed than I was upset by what had happened to me. So I'd had, to be clear, I didn't have the most unusual experience, but that I think is what makes me so passionate about talking about incontinence more, because what happened to me was a very everyday story. I gave birth, I had a bit of incontinence. It was initially kind of brushed off a bit, said you know, this was normal for postnatal, but even quite quickly after my son was born, it became obvious that this was actually a more serious problem. And that sort of set me off, if you like, on a 10-year odyssey where I went into the sort of bowels of many hospitals and into the most sort of terrifying and taboo corridors, and also met, I must add, for anyone watching this feeling weird, met some of the most astonishing, amazing and passionate healthcare professionals. So I couldn't quite understand why we don't celebrate the research that's been done, celebrate these things that can help, like physiotherapy, but also pay a bit of care and attention and kindness to things that we know both from anecdata, from our own understanding, that women find it difficult and embarrassing to go beyond just the social chit chat. So we can all joke about wetting ourselves if we drink too much Chardonnay or go on a trampoline, but we might not actually say, this makes me feel awful, or it's ruining my partnership with my husband or wife, or whatever it is. And I felt this was so everyday, and yet wasn't getting any help. And when I read the statistics, they were just beyond alarming, like how many years it takes women to go and get help when we know that help's out there. So that's one reason why I read the book. The other reason is that a really nice, feisty and frankly astonishing Scottish physiotherapist emailed me via Mumsnet and was like, let's align soapboxes, we should do something. Because one thing I had started doing was blogging and trying to be very honest and clear about my own experiences of things like tests, of things like testing rooms, and how even the most kind de-stigmatising care can fall short because of the social stigma around incontinence. So it's very hard to bring up certain types of incontinence over others. There's nowhere to put your knickers and trousers with a tenor lady pad in when you get to the place, and all that sort of stuff. And when you emailed me through Mumsnet, you said, like, that's the first time I'd read a patient saying this, and this is really helpful. And that had never occurred to me in my whole journey. It occurred to me that I could write stuff for magazines and papers and say to other women at parties, because I very quickly became the poster girl for wetting your knickers. Every party I went to, people were like, oh, you've got to meet my friend Anne, you must meet Sarah, she wants to talk to you. And I've heard every story now from every woman I've ever met about their incontinence, and that's great, because sometimes I'm the first person they've told. But I felt that there was a bigger thing we could do. We could help healthcare professionals do more, we could get the issue talked about more, and that would help the much bigger issue, which is a feminist political issue with incontinence, that it's a huge global problem and it could be cured, it could be sorted. We've got most of the information we need, but it's not happening. And I think I became so fired up about being able to do all those things that I was like, I have to write a book. So I wrote the book.
And the reception to your book has been amazing, really remarkable.
And I think that there's also something, I feel very honoured, because I can't tell you some of the emails I've had, not millions, but lots and considered and long emails, and people saying, people who I knew at primary school getting back in touch, people I've never met, people who I realise halfway through the email are friends of mine's mothers, and they have told me their stories. And I thought, this is a normal part of a lot of women's experience, but it is something that could be changed and cured. And we've got all these women here who have these stories, and nobody's ever given them permission to say, actually, I didn't think it was very funny when I sneezed and wet myself in front of my boss. Actually, I felt awful. Actually, I think it contributed to my postnatal depression, and nobody ever told me that there's a clear scientific link between the two, so I thought it was my fault. And that is, I mean, that's astonishing, but also adds to the broader platform of FemRaw, I think, because doesn't that show that we have to move beyond making women just solve each other's problems by chatting? We have to move to the point where we can change things in a bigger scale. But yeah, there was people have been so kind and so sweet. And also, like, I've had quite a lot of healthcare people, because I was really worried that I would write a book and it would look like a misery memoir, or I had an axe to grind, and I really don't. I've had such exceptional care in so many places, and sometimes not everybody's brilliant and perfect, but most of it has been really, really useful. And I've had some lovely emails, but from very senior, you know, obstetricians and gynecologists and urologists, and some of them have said things like, well, I hadn't really, I've never come across a story like that. And I thought, you must come across 20 stories like that every day, but you've never heard them, because you're just there to fix a waggly bladder neck, or to put a mesh in, or to, God forbid, take it out after it's caused loads of problems, or to deliver a third baby by C-section. And you don't know that mine's not a unique story. Just weirdly, I didn't care enough to be cowed anymore, so I wrote it down.
You forgot to be ashamed.
Yeah, it's a confidence trick.
Yeah. I'm really encouraged that healthcare professionals have got in touch with you, because patient voice is so important. You're right, it's easy to get, when you work in a field, it's easy to get caught up with the really unusual and the really special and intricate and exciting clinical problems, but the mundane everyday things have huge impact. And I think that's part of the reason why this stuff has been missed in women's healthcare, because there isn't a vehicle to deliver decent pelvic health education at all. There never has been, because it's just not glamorous enough. There's not big money in teaching women pelvic floor exercises. There's a lot of savings to be had. And I think that I'm really pleased that surgeons and obstetricians and physios are reading your book, because we have a lot to learn from women. That's what Mesh Inquiry just found.
Yeah. And that, like, I mean, I also, that the last part of the book is about like medics and those sorts of things, and about this sort of weird thing when you're a patient. Because if you're a patient, the worst day of your life will often be like quite exciting for someone else. I met a midwife, and I talk about in the book, one of the last things that happened was I met this midwife, and she said she loved stitching up like really complicated tears, and she went into such a reverie that I felt like I was sort of kneeling in the carpet in reception listening to this story. And she was talking about how she was holding in her hands somebody's sex life, their sexual fulfillment, their feelings about their own gender, their capacity for shame, their ability to have an orgasm, how they weave, everything in this like craggle, and when I saw my broken bits by accident, because there was a shiny surface near where I was being stitched up, and a midwife just stepped out of the way, and I got this full-on glare of this broken red cave of madness, and really felt that bad that I hadn't looked earlier when it was prettier when I was younger, and that now I was confronted by this mess. When I did that was awful, and for the woman standing in front of me, it was brilliant. Like, this was great. And I think that we need to be more honest about that, and more honest about the fact that even if it's not an exciting tear, even if yours is a boring breast cancer, even if your the need for hormonal intervention in the menopause is actually run of the mill, for you it's not. For you, your life has been transformed. And so both of those things have to come to play for medical professionals, and in a way for patients. We need to learn to push back and say, hang on, I have a very close friend who was having cancer treatment. She died recently, and she told me that at one point a doctor said, and we'll just whip your ovaries out. And she was like, and that's the thing. What upsets me most about her telling me that is that that's not the first time a woman has told me that sort of story. It's not the 10th. It's not, and we can have a better world. And I don't think women just the ones who have to solve it either. Women's health shouldn't be a problem for women just to solve, but
you've had really positive reception from men from your book, and some men with quite high profile in the followings on social media and things have been super supportive of it. And I think that's really interesting, because women's health is about women, but it impacts on men as well. So if the women are traumatized because they've had a birth injury, the men that love them are upset about that and want to help, but there isn't anywhere for them to find information from.
That's totally true. I mean, for those of you who haven't read the book, it's illustrated, and I don't want to lose my place for the reading later, but one of the first illustrations in it is of an episiotomy, which is obviously quite a sort of graphic illustration. I'll find it and hold it up when I do my reading. But I had lots of responses from men, and from a couple of men saying to me, I wish I'd seen that too. And I'm sure it's the same for female partners. I was staggered. I didn't have an episiotomy in the end, but when it was about to happen, because I didn't know what it was, and when I looked at what it actually was, I couldn't believe it. And it is squeamish, it is difficult, but showing a woman who's 8 months pregnant that is not very helpful. Making sure that most people, whether they decide to have a baby or not, whether they get pregnant or not, what just the basics of obstetric and gynecological stuff is, so that they're making an informed, consenting choice about what's happening to them, would be helpful. And that's not just about people with female body parts knowing that, that's about everyone knowing that. Because one man whose wife read the book, and he had also read it, he came to me and he said, that was the worst moment of my life too, when I saw someone go in and perform an episiotomy. And I thought, I bet, that's not nice. So it's for everyone, isn't it?
Why don't you read your section from your book now?
Oh yes, okay.
Before you do, Lucy, can I just say to everybody who's come along today to listen to both you and Elaine, if you have any questions, please ask them. You can do it anonymously. On the bottom of your screen, there is a bar and there's a chat box, and there's also a Q&A box. We've already got, I think, 5 questions I can see there. Please feel free to add yours in. You can do it anonymously as well. And we will try and get to these at the end of the session. So I'll try and sort of stop Lucy and Elaine at about sort of 1:45, and then we'll ask the questions, because it's very important that we do. Okay, thank you. Sorry.
No, that's great. So what I'm going to read, you asked me sort of why I started speaking up. So I'm going to read just a little bit, just for, we've got about 5 minutes. So it's a few pages about why I started writing it, and how it isn't always easy for anybody to talk about this sort of stuff, even when it's common enough. Just saying it's fine to get help ignores the truth that being incontinent is grim, and many people think of it as a problem for smelly old ladies or outcasts. And that's what made me want to start talking about it. Fury at the myths and misogyny, and the hope that hearing they weren't alone would encourage someone, anyone, to feel less wretched and get help. I needed to point out that incontinence can usually be fixed, and that a good life is possible even if it can't. That there are economic benefits to helping the leaky amongst us get dry, and that we all need to grow up and start talking about it properly, because it is the right thing to do, and it might make millions of lives better, and also somehow make my life better too. People often ask if I've always been confident talking about this stuff. I should be so lucky. My hand was forced. 30-year-old me, despite being ready to build a house full of boys, would have rather died than fart in public. 40-something me, broken me, has to find a way of living with the risk. Coming unclean and talking about my broken family wasn't something I've planned. I was born with a feminist roar, but not a lack of embarrassment. I had to build that up, that Teflon tenor bravado, from scratch, starting so stressed out in mother care that I was leaking everywhere. Face tear streaked, shoes in a puddle, my maternity bra on the verge of smelling like yogurt. The end of summer 2007, a large baby wear shop. I'm in mother care. I'm not here to buy booties or baby socks or a new pram. I lived the excitement and thrill of all that. I'm here because I vaguely remember they have a section full of products to help clear up mummy-made mess, from squirting breast milk to post-birth bleeding, and including what I really need right now, the extensive day-to-day equipment to stop leaking so badly I ruin my trousers every time I push my buggy up the curb. I've been told I have a problem down there, and it's already making my brain a bit wonky. I have referral letters in my changing bag to speak to a counsellor from a birth trauma team, and physio sessions booked in. I feel overwhelmingly disgusting. It is so distressing and stressful to risk peeing if I try to carry my baby in a sling or do any of the things other mums seem to be doing. I've been making do with sanitary towels left gathering dust in my bathroom while I was pregnant, but I'm learning they can't really handle pee, which doesn't drip steadily like menstrual blood, but pours thick and fast if the floodgates open, and that if they get drenched, they're likely to chafe or disintegrate. I wheel my son through, past the kids' clothes, the plimsolls and sun hats, the breastfeeding tops and the fancy dress outfits, kidding myself I can handle it, until I see the potties and baby wipes. They signal we're in the zone now, the mother care aisle of shame. It's a shrine to absorbency. The shelves piled high with plastic packaging in soothing blues and greens with teardrops to represent urine flow, and big bold letters shouting loud about masking odour and discretion. There are cartons of fake knickers, pads for your bed, and massive maternity towels, all hiding next to the nappies. I'm new to this. I didn't realise there were so many nappies. Nappies in every conceivable size and shape, for girls and boys, for swimming and sleeping, for potties and pulling up, and for useless broken muffs like mine. I think, nappies everywhere, even ones for me, and then I burst into tears. It's dawning on me that this embarrassing, unholy mess is not a short-term issue. It's going to require these pads, probably a new mattress, and a way of preventing myself from ever crying again, as I realise, standing there, that anything more than the most graceful sob also makes pee escape. I stand stock still and hope my jeans will soak up enough to save my dignity, and pray, pray, even though I believe in nothing, that I'll be able to get out of the shop without bumping into anyone I know, that I can escape without leaving an actual puddle on the floor. I want to howl. To howl. It isn't fair. Incontinence paraphernalia is expensive, uncomfy, and I'm permanently terrified of accidents in public that broadcast my brokenness. Also, it feels like admitting my big fear, that I might be stuck like this forever, to engage with buying all the different brands and working out which is my best fit. But it's too pressing. So I call my mum. She's visiting anyway and organises supplies like she did with tampons and pads when I started. The next week, I've used them all up, a bad sign, and I'm still scared of shopping for them, and that Mother Care will invoice me if I did leave a puddle. So my husband has to step up and go on a pad hunt. 3 minutes walk from our house, 3 million light years from his comfort zone, a ramshackled local pharmacy becomes his haven. The elderly pharmacist steps in to support a tired young man with a whole new universe of stigma to conquer. Between them, they work the full gamut of adult diapers, and my husband becomes an expert. It's hard to know which one of us was more relieved when we get to grips with online shopping. I know we were all saved.
Thank you. Yeah, really good. Yeah, I love the way that you write about the impact that shame has on people with incontinence. And we know that shame and stigma is a real barrier to people seeking help. Physio hat on. The stats you mentioned earlier, Janet, it's 1 in 3 women that wet themselves, and it takes a long time for people to seek help. But the average is that it takes 7 years for a woman with stress incontinence, which is just she wets herself a bit when she laughs and coughs and sneezes, to come and speak to her GP. So for those 7 years, she's living like you just described. And the thing with my job, because I'm a fanny physio, I get the usual joke about, would you get sponsorship from one of the pad companies? And I think I should really get sponsorship from the tissue companies. Yes. Women come in and they burst into tears because they're genuinely traumatised with this awful thing that they've had to accommodate into their lives. And the impact that it interferes with absolutely every single thing that they want to do, and it's exhausting for them.
Sometimes people say, what's the thing you need if you're incontinent? And I just think pragmatism. That's what I learned. It's not about bravery. It made me so pragmatic in such a brutal way. You have to have 2 outfits for everything. Yeah. You have to wear black. You have to make sure you've got a spare pair of knickers in your handbag and your desk drawer. You have carpet. You need cardigans with big enough pockets, because tenor ladies are bigger than a tampon. And it's exhausting. And so there's I'm not surprised at all that it's massively linked to things like depression. And I'm not surprised women hide it either, because I think that socially we're conditioned to expecting a load of guff in our pants and to be not moaning about it, not making a fuss. So we just sort of trudge on, and suddenly I can so see why it's 7 years, because you have a baby, and it's only when they've finally gone to school where you start to think, hang on, do I have to what? Because you've finally, I don't know, got a bit of yourself back.
But this is why I get so exasperated with my professional peers, because we know that once we get women into clinic, they get better. So if you've just got simple stress incontinence and you do your pelvic floor exercises, about 70% of women can be dry within 4 months with self-management. And if that doesn't work, if they come to physio, there's a good quality paper that shows that 6 sessions of physio has got an 84% cure rate. So my frustration is that we don't talk about this, that there's no need for the cobbles in Edinburgh to be so slippy, because it's not always the rain. We need to get women understanding that this is common but not normal, and where to find help.
And presumably if they find help sooner, so they don't, that nobody says, oh God, yeah, that always happens, it'll calm down. If they come sooner, they're more likely to be helped. I mean, that would be my guess, because they won't develop more complex problems or bad habits.
Usually what happens is woman wets herself a bit and she's embarrassed, so she manages that by never drinking anything again and going to the toilet every 5 minutes. So by the time she lands up in clinic, and although the average is 7 years, that's taken from the research that we've done. I mean, I don't even blink when somebody says they've had a problem since their baby was born and their baby's now 45. It's just standard. So all those decades later, it is a more complex problem. If we can get them early enough, the majority of women get better. And that's why it's so exasperating that we just don't address this properly.
And it's true of the other sort of incontinence types as well, isn't it? Because I also had urge incontinence, which is different. And as you know, and so for example, it's sometimes called latchkey incontinence and things like that. It's got lots of various different names, but anyone who's ever seen a woman, especially post-lockdown, standing in a park looking like terrified and eyes darting around, or that woman who's just got out of the car at the service station is like that woman might have urge incontinence. And that, again, that takes bladder retraining to sort out. And that sounds really tricky. It's not. It's really straightforward, and it's not ideal, because any kind of retraining of your fanny is not going to be like having a massage and get, you know, going on a date with George Clooney, is it? It's going to be grim, but you can sort it out very quickly. That's what I couldn't believe with urge incontinence. That just felt like that would be my state. That was my price for having my lovely babies, and I was just always going to have to be one of those people who knew where every toilet was, and that was the wrong mindset for it.
Told you. No, it's not anybody's job to tell you what you can reasonably expect from your bladder and bowel during the course of your lifetime. This needs to be in sex ed at schools and teach kids what is normal and what is not. And then if it's not normal, they will recognise it and be more likely to come and seek help. You mentioned fecal incontinence, so the stats for it are really, really hard to establish. The official figure is it's about 1 in 10 people that can't control their poo, but trying to get an honest answer out of people about this is a bit of a challenge, because usually if somebody says, excuse me, do you poo yourself? You would say, no. Certainly not. Certainly not. Yes, I do. And can I be in your research study? Because that would make me happy. So, you know, the data is quite hard to get hold of in the first place, and most of it comes from clinic. So most of the data that we work with is based on urban white middle class women, because we are overrepresented in clinic. And that's a big problem, because while you've got the ability to advocate for yourself, and even you struggled with it, Lucy, the majority of women, we don't know anything about them. Women in geographically remote areas, economically deprived areas, or who have or culturally diverse populations, they're missing from the data.
Yeah, and we can tell that there are I mean, that's what upsets me most when you look into that, is that I have an enormous amount of privilege. I mean, I tried to amplify as many voices as I could in my book and sort of say there are these other stories out there. But I always think about, like, you know, what is your normal British woman, and she's called Debbie or Sarah, and she works in a call centre, and she gets fired because you can't you can't take a break, or she works in a high street store and she's on her feet all day, and that means that her incontinence is really bad in the evenings, so she has to amend her social life, and it shouldn't be like this. I had a job where I could go to hospital appointments. I did scribble out the hospital numbers, and I didn't want them to know I was going to the fecal incontinence unit or whatever. But what a privilege. I could say I was working from home. There are lots of women who can't be working from home waiting for that phone call from the, you know, Urogyne team or whatever, and they can't do that. So we need to make sure that nobody's left behind, that any innovations that we make or changes involve everyone and every sort of life that they could be living.
Because it's not just about embarrassment. When you look at the impact on somebody's health and well-being, this stuff, it is more, there's data that suggests that being incontinent has more of an impact on your well-being than having asthma or diabetes. And because it affects everything, and if you don't do anything about it, it doesn't go away, then it becomes a lifelong issue. So you mentioned about postnatal depression. So we know that wetting yourself in the first 6 weeks after having had a baby doubles your risk of postnatal depression. We also know that if you don't do your pelvic floor exercises or seek help and it continues, you're still likely to be wetting yourself when your baby's 12 and starting high school. We also know that once you're menopausal and you start to lose your estrogen, then because that affects all of the soft tissue in your body, where some of the muscles attach onto in your pelvic floor is on ligaments. So they change, and a lot of women start to find they either initially leak when they're menopausal or it's significantly worse. And if they don't do anything about it, then it doesn't go away and it deteriorates. Being incontinent is associated with hip fractures, because older women, especially if they've got urgency, they're rushing to go to the toilet and they fall and break their hip. And some of these women die from their injury. And it's the second most common reason for a woman to move into residential care. So if we can if we can capture women when they're 15 and they've got a bit of giggle incontinence and that's stopping them from going to PE lessons, and they're trying to dodge out of it because
tampons fall out of it,
embarrass themselves, then they stop exercising at that age. And we know that they do that, but there isn't any education provided for PE teachers to pick out that child and say, actually, this is your signposting, this is where we're going to send them to help. And they land up in this trajectory of nonsense that really interferes into their life, which could be fixed for practically zero money.
It's astonishing, isn't it? So, because obviously I'm very passionate about it like you, and so we're on this sort of, Elaine and I are in this sort of Twitter sphere of sort of endless P talk, and then sometimes it's like, I like other stuff too, I like movies, but I saw an amazing story just this morning from someone who was saying that they were working with serving police officers and increasing fitness when they come back to work from maternity leave, and it was years into the job that somebody said the reason that as a woman she was finding it so hard was because in all the drills and things she was leaking, and it just hadn't occurred to that physio, not because they weren't a pelvic health specialist, they were doing other stuff, more OH stuff. And you think that type of story is replicated everywhere, and then if you take, you know, Lizzie or Nita or whoever it is who's working in Next, who's found it quite tricky and has stopped her social life, and perhaps it's impacted her marriage or her partnership and her sex life, so she's just accepted that as her lot, and then we're saying that she goes on all the way, then trips while she's trying to run to the loo, is in hospital, so more likely to be put in pads because that's easier, she's in long-term care, so she goes in being someone who can run to the loo, she slipped a bit, couldn't we all, and now she's pad dependent. It's impossible for her daughters to look after her anymore, so she ends up in residential care, and she's more likely to die. Like, and it's not an exaggeration to say it's a feminist and a moral issue to sort something out. If you had a cure for cancer and you weren't doing anything about it, we'd be like...
Yeah, we've had the answer to this for 30 years. For 30 years, we've known that pelvic floor exercises are cheap to teach, they're free to do, and the side effect is probably an improved orgasm. Like, it should not be a hard sell. Really should not be hard.
Tell them about men as well, Elaine. Tell them, my favourite thing about pelvic floor and writing the book was that I managed to get what I thought was the most alarming, much more alarming than an episiotomy illustration in the book, which was of this sort of amazing, craggly, disgusting thing, which turned out to be a male pelvic floor when I'd first seen it. And so I spent the whole time when I was drafting the book going up and asking, and I found very few men who even knew they had one, and very few, like at least most women can go, because of Victoria Wood, like we can sort of, I mean, I don't know if everyone's doing it. Whenever I went to a talk or anything like this, I would be furiously clenching, but maybe not thinking about how I was going to put it into my life later. But yeah, the men's stuff is just fascinating, because I mean, maybe that's the way to get the funding, is to start talking about men's pelvic floors.
Usually the first time a man realises that he's got a pelvic floor is when a urologist starts talking about it, because he's got a misbehaving prostate gland. Up until that point, they're usually completely unaware about it. But if a man has got, so if you look at things like erectile dysfunction, which is deeply distressing to most men, their willy's not behaving in the way that they want it to, it really does upset them. So if they don't have cardiovascular disease, diabetes, side effects from medication or psychological illness, then doing pelvic floor exercises is more effective than Viagra. So men are interested in that. And the impact that something like erectile dysfunction has on a man's quality of life is massive. But trying to get that herd up above the marketing influence that pharmaceuticals have is a bit of a challenge. I went into Scottish Parliament to sort of petition for all of this and said to 6 male MSPs, this will make your willy stronger for longer, and I can save you a lot of money at the same time, so you should probably phone me. And that got their attention, which was useful.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I have found that that's the sort of thing, like what I, later in my book, I mean, it isn't all just stories of the various times in my life where I fought myself, although there is some of that. But I did talk a lot about stuff that we've discussed endlessly, which is that, you know, there are taboos within taboos, fecal incontinence, also the impact of incontinence on people's sex lives, because the Viagra thing's true, but it's also massively true for women. And when I was researching to get sort of evidence-based and interest from physiotherapists and researchers and people who worked in charities and all sorts of people who manufactured stuff, I was asking about what, you know, was there anything in the book they wanted to talk about? And so many of them said, would you? Nobody does. Nobody even brings it up. And when I did go and talk about incontinence and its impact on my sex life and its impact on my mental health, it was astonishing. My GP said that she'd never had someone talk to her about how severely depressed being fecally incontinent makes you. She said, she could tell that they were severely depressed, but nobody had articulated it. And she'd been a GP for 25 years. And no one had. And the same with sex, that nobody was coming and saying that. And when I had questions, so in terms of destigmatizing, like, I've talked about this book a little bit, and I have to bring this because this is a bottom tampon. This is like a tampon, but you put it up your bottom to stop bowel incontinence. And the reason I bring it up is because I'm over that we're so upset about this, because if people don't go and get it for fecal incontinence, and that's 10% of people, probably more because people lie about it, then how many people are not getting proper bowel checkups and things like that? And it's going to bite you. But when I got a prescription for it, my GP had never seen one. And so that's the level of untalking about it that's going on, that people aren't able to have the conversation. And you can't talk to a patient unless you've seen it and touched it. And you can't get over the stigma and taboo around the worst taboos, because when you're outside, wetting yourself is terrible. But fecal incontinence and incontinence when you are leaking when you're having sex, right? That taboo hits you when you're on your own and you're standing on the landing and you're afraid to go into the bedroom because you don't want that, but you do want that, so you're broken. And nobody talks about it, so you won't get the conversation. But we have to get to the point where we could all do that. I mean, it's not going to hurt you. And I really feel like
talking is kryptonite to taboos. It's the only way forwards. If we can make it so that there's a common ground for to initiate the conversation, then it will go. You're very good at using, I want to say minge cringe, Lucy. Oh, did you say that? It's a good way of getting people to start talking about it. You can either confront them with something that makes them laugh and then makes them talk, or something that is so close to the knuckle that it makes you recognise it and realise that you've never discussed it, ever. And both of those things seem to be effective, but there's a lot of work to be done. The thing I was petitioning the Scottish Parliament for was to have a baby grow in our baby box scheme that says do your pelvic floor exercises. Because nobody is going to want to put that on their beautiful little baby. Nobody's going to want to have a baby grow that talks about vaginas essentially on their beautiful baby. But the baby will pee on everything else and vomit and everything else. It will land up in their laundry, and that will become the measure of, I'm having a really bad week, look, the baby's in the fanny vest. And that, it should be enough to get women talking.
And I think also challenging something. So I think the other thing is, because it's left to women to talk, and I've never worked in this field. I didn't know anything about it. I had no idea there were bottom tampons. I didn't know you could have an MRI machine where you did a poo in it. I wish I didn't, and I didn't know what urodynamics meant. But what that also meant was that when we did do the top level chat, the like, oh God, I don't think I can go running for a bit kind of chat that women have, people don't know the full story. So you've got these non-experts talking, and women start to collude without meaning to, without doing anything on purpose, trying their best. You can't be angry with women for being cowed by stigma that's thousands of years old and that is global. But we can improve education, because otherwise women say things like, well, I had a cesarean, so I'm fine. Well, actually, you still should be doing your pelvic floors. Actually, you could be really helping. Or I'm really, they do loads of exercise, so people are like, well, you're right, you're really fit and healthy. Actually, there are real issues around pelvic floor for women who are sports elite athletes. So it's just a little bit of talking is the start, and then we need to.
You need that to unpick the myths. So when I ask women about how much they wet themselves in clinic, I often hear, just the normal amount. Because there's this perception that leaking is normal if you've had kids. If you're of a certain age, it's normal. It's just common. It's not normal. It doesn't matter how old you are and what physical state that you're in. It is not normal to be leaking pee, poo, or pumps.
I am just going to interrupt. We have got 22 questions to get through. So
Go for it.
Do you want to finish what you were going to say, and then I'm going to hit you with the questions?
No,
if
that's fine.
okay.
I think that's a good spot to finish on.
It really is. I think the list is important. I feel like the list that you send out to women should be more than laughing and jumping, because it should be like farting and things like that, so women realise that there's an extent to it.
Yeah.
Okay, so the first one I have here is I had my the first of my 3 kids in France, where perineum rehabilitation physio sessions are provided all free. Here I've had to find a private, in brackets, French physio. How easy is it to find NHS support?
It should be a matter of just speaking to your GP and getting referred. There aren't enough pelvic health physios, and so depending on where you live, it can be more of a challenge than others. So it's pretty easy in cities. In more rural locations, it can be more difficult. The good thing that's come out of COVID is telehealth has really come to its own. So if you are having a problem finding somebody, then there's a good central resource on a Squeezy website. Squeezy is an app that's endorsed by the NHS, and they have like a central register of physios that specialise in pelvic health. So have a look at that and see if there's anybody that you can find online. But there's fewer than 900 registered specialist physios in the UK at the moment, so we need an awful lot more of us.
Okay, thank you. The next one is, my baby is 21 months old. I went to women's physio when he was 3 months old. I do my exercises, in brackets, maybe just not enough, but still have a bit of incontinence when I stumble, sneeze, run or dance. Will it ever be cured? It's a difficult one to answer, but...
Well, it should be. If you just follow the normal curve, then it takes a year after you stop breastfeeding for your body to return to its pre-pregnant state. So it could be relevant to that if you've breastfed for an extended period of time. Pelvic floor exercises don't work for everybody. So if the problem isn't just simple weakness, they're not going to work. Go back to physio and get another assessment. The stats are that if you do your pelvic floor exercises 3 times a day for 3 to 4 months, most people will improve. So if that's not helpful for you, then sometimes it's that you're not doing the exercises quite properly, because they're hard to know if you're doing them properly or not, or that it's not a weakness problem, it's that the muscles are too rigid and they're not relaxing properly. Or if you've had an assisted birth and you've had forceps and that sort of thing, then you can land up with a birth injury, which needs to be treated. So the advice is go back.
Yeah. Okay. There are other things alongside pelvic floor exercises, or certainly that's what I was told, that can help as well. So there's like losing weight, thinking about when you're drinking caffeine and alcohol and things like that. So there's more to it than just the exercises, if there's a little bit more work to do.
Yeah.
Okay, I think that actually answers the next question, which is how do you know when you've gone past physio and you might need access to a gynae consultant and possible for tests and possible surgical intervention? Well, I think you've answered that already.
And also, if you're in physio, your physio will know, so they will refer you to a multidisciplinary team, hopefully in your area.
Yeah.
And the NICE guidelines state that you shouldn't be going for surgery unless you've seen physio first.
Yeah. Another one is, can incontinence be fixed without a mesh?
Yes.
Great. Do Kegel trainers work?
Some of them are very good, some of them are rubbish. It depends on what your problem is. So if women have got real weakness and they can hardly initiate a contraction at all, then we would use electrical stimulation to try and trigger the muscle to work. But if you're buying that independently without an assessment, you might not actually need it. It might be a different problem that you've got. So again, some of the products that you can buy online are very good, but you're better, if you're going to spend money, you're better spending money getting an assessment to make sure it's the right thing for you.
They will be recommended by, like, even NHS physios will recommend things like fanny weighters. I mean, they've got a proper name, but I had little weights. So you know, there's all sorts there, depending on your issue.
Thank you. And the third part of the question is it normal that I leak around my period, more around my period?
Yeah, it's to do with the hormonal changes. So the change in your hormones can have an effect on your ligaments. That's why a lot of women become pretty clumsy just before they get their period, because your ligaments aren't as responsive as they would be normally. So that, because the muscles attach, the pelvic floor muscles attach onto ligaments, they're not supporting your bladder properly, and women often find they leak more in the week before their period.
And the same with pelvic girdle issues as well can sometimes come back due to your, but it's worth emphasising that quite strongly, because I don't think anybody ever told me, and I just thought that that was me, that I was broken, and I think that that's quite a common misconception. Same with the breastfeeding thing. I think that's not very well emphasised, especially not in breastfeeding information, that it will delay your ability to sort of snap back. But the other thing that we talk about a lot, Elaine, is that your postnatal body is your postnatal body for the rest of your life. You might be signed off at 6 weeks, but these impacts are things that we should all know about, but also bear in mind, I think.
Yeah, I absolutely. Is incontinence also a common symptom of menopause? You've answered that because you've said yes, it is. It's affecting me at 51 and impacting my life.
Yeah, doesn't mean that it can't be helped. Usually it's because of the changes in natural muscle. Sometimes the loss of estrogen is linked with vaginal atrophy. So vulvas are really thirsty organs for estrogen, and if you start to lose it, then the tissue thins and you can get more prone to picking up urinary tract infections and things like that. Local estrogen is really easy. It's just a pessary that you put in once a week, and it zhushes everything back up and can help reduce symptoms of leaking. So see your GP.
Thank you for that one. Lucy, do you feel that the current adverts for pads do not help, as it makes people believe that all you can do is wear pads?
Yeah, and that was another sort of real instrumental thing in me starting to write about it, was that I felt, well, two things. One, I felt that they didn't represent the full gamut of women, do they? They show a certain sort of woman who's like smiling her head off because she's wearing a disgusting pair of 10 and 80 knickers or whatever. So I felt that it was not the truth, that for a lot of people is a bit of a sigh moment if you have to put them on. But also I think that they do encourage us to put up and shut up and not make a fuss. They're also massively expensive, to the point where quite a lot of those knickers, I've seen supermarkets that have had the tag on them because they're such an expensive item. And one of the things with tads, we talk about period poverty a lot. We've all got there. We've got there with this conversation about tampons being expensive and stuff. And like, speak to your local food bank. I mean, imagine that choice. Do I give the kids dinner, or can I go to work or go and collect them from school without leaking? So I think that there's lots of political stuff around pads, but yeah, I do think that there's an issue with the way they're advertised, because also what they're suggesting, A, is that incontinence is normal, and B, that putting up with it is normal and what we should all do. And that just completely obscures the reality, which is that most things can be helped. And even if they can't, the reason I don't complete diss pads is they can be hugely empowering feminist items, because there are some women, and I'm included in this, for whom I've had surgery, I've had all sorts of interventions, but I have ongoing issues. For me, they are a game changer, and the fact that they now make them in black, that they're starting over the last 4 or 5 years to be innovation, is really good, because they fit better. They are making them for different shapes and sizes now. They're not all white and all those things. But what we mustn't do is lose sight of the fact that for the vast majority of people, they can be massively helped.
Yeah,
they don't have to live like that.
It's really important not to demonise people that rely on pads.
Oh, no.
But the pad manufacturers themselves, some of what they say is factually incorrect in their adverts, and they all have information on their websites with positive advice and with advice to seek help, but it's not at the forefront of what they do. And I would really like to see that change. And I know how to get them to do it, because then most people, I've never heard a woman say, did you see that advert for that pad? It was brilliant, wasn't it? Yeah. Their adverts are universally badly received. And again, I think it's because they're not really listening to what women are saying. The only people that hear the truth of it are when you've got an hour-long appointment with a woman that you can do over a period of time and build up a relationship with her.
On pads, it's worth noting that when there was the toilet roll shortage and all the reporting of that pre-COVID, I went into a Superdrug and I stood next to a woman of colour. She was probably in her, I would say at least 80s, possibly 90s, and she was pulling her trolley, and I was standing next to her, and there was not a tenor lady to be seen. There was not any incontinence. It was bare shelves. I mean, you didn't get any photos of that on social media.
Yeah.
And she turned to me and said, well, you know, sort of like, we're not the only ones. And I just thought, yeah, right, we're not the only ones. We can't demonize pad users, and there are loads of them, and for some women it is the only thing keeping them going, because it is awful weighing on your jeans. It is awful. So we can't, but I do think that there is a problem with presenting it as
the only answer
and something we should be happy about.
Yeah, I absolutely, I think you're right. I'm going to try and go through these as quickly as we can. We've only got 5 minutes left. If you practice pelvic floor exercises regularly before pregnancy, do you think it reduces risk of incontinence post-birth? Can I just say one thing here, please? Ladies and men, we should all be doing pelvic floor exercises forever. And, you know, from, I don't know what age we start them, but sort of teenage years. I mean, we've all got to be doing them, not just when you want to get pregnant. Anyway,
and you mustn't feel it's your fault if you didn't do pelvic floor exercises before, or you found out later that you weren't doing them right. It is not your fault. I spent so much money on therapy and so many depressed years feeling suicidal sometimes, and it is not your fault. It's not your fault. None of us were taught any of this properly. So if you didn't do them before, or you were doing them and then later a physio says, no, God, you know, stretch it the other way, that's okay. It's not your fault. You would probably have torn anyway. You know, do you know what I mean? It's not going to prevent anything.
Absolutely. Elaine, help us here, please.
Yes.
Yeah, no, that's true. 30% of women, instead of squeezing, the key to pelvic floor exercises is imagine that you're squeezing your bum hole shut and lifting it up. So you take a deep breath in and sigh out, and then squeeze and lift your bum hole. But about 30% of women bear down as if they're doing a Valsalva move. So that is usually the first mistake, that people aren't doing them correctly. There is a preventative effect for prolapse. Pelvic floor exercises can help manage prolapse, and it's never too late to start. So the sooner we can get people educated into this basic self-care, great, but there's not an end point beyond which then there can't be any improvement.
Yeah, absolutely. An interesting one here. Can any GP refer to a pelvic health physiotherapist? Yes,
the care pathway should be in their basic pack of GP-ness. Yeah, they'd be able to refer. In fact, you can refer yourself in quite a lot of authorities. Yeah, okay. So if you do Google for your local health authority, NHS health authority, and either women's health or continence physiotherapy, there should be a phone number that you can just give them a ring.
Yeah, yeah. A lady here says she's suffered incontinence for 15 years. And please can you show me some good pelvic exercise and various other bits there. We talked about this before, did we not, about maybe doing a pelvic floor exercise webinar?
We can do a clench along, that'd be great.
And we could talk about all the different ways, because the Elaine's bum hole thing, but there's other metaphors. Like, honestly, it took about 7 years of my incontinence journey till I met someone who said, oh, imagine that you've got a tampon in and it's not quite right, but what sort of movement would you make? And I was like, bingo. So now I could, like, so we just need to talk more, and you'll hear we should get lots of physios and lots of different women to say like what works when they're getting it right.
The best explanation that I've seen online at the moment is on an Australian site that's got essential funding called pelvicfloorfirst.org.au. So if you have a look on that, they've got a really good bit about talking you through how to do the exercises.
Yeah, yeah, okay. Which paper were you talking about that said 80% of women will improve with 6 sessions of physio?
It was published in New Zealand, and I can't remember off the top of my head what the title of it was, but I'll find it and I'll put it up. The the findings of that paper caught the Australian government's eye, and that's why they did a big study in 2010, so it must be before that, where they looked at the total costs of incontinence to the public purse in Australia, and their total cost was just shy of $43 billion. So I will find the name of the paper and put it to you, because it's quite an important one in that it shows that physio is really cheap, surgery is not cheap, and the cost of the public purse is enormous.
Okay. Thank you. Is running ill-advised with stress incontinence?
Well, that's a good question. So exercise is good for you. It's really important that we keep people moving, but if you're doing an exercise that is causing you to leak, it is a symptom that your pelvic floor isn't strong enough for that exercise. When you're running, when your heel hits the ground, there's 3 times your body weight in impact rattling from your heel up into your pelvic floor. And so if you weigh 10 stones, that's 30 stones of pressure with each step. So lots and lots of women are able to run for the bus, but they couldn't do 5K. And it just means that your pelvic floor is getting tired and it's not able to resist the forces. So the short answer, which runners do not want to hear, is if you're leaking, then you need to adapt what you're doing. You need to adapt your training. It doesn't mean that we're going to take your trainers away from you. It means changing things so that you're actually fit enough for doing the activity. Because if you're leaking while you're running, then you're stressing your pelvic floor, and that increases the risk of developing other problems, like it's potentially linked with prolapse. So we would like you to come to clinic and get some advice about how to do it. Sometimes it's just something like using a pessary while you're running to support the pelvic floor, or changing the surface that you're running on, or sorting out your rectus diastasis, that if your abdominal muscles aren't supporting your core correctly, then that increases the risk of leaking. But yeah, we want women to be dry when they run.
And it's totally evidence that we don't treat the pelvic floor like anything else, because the most serious runners I know who found that problematic would not run on a torn ligament on their ankle. So you need to treat your pelvic floor with the same respect, which first of all is acknowledging it exists, that you would treat any other muscle in training, because it's not about your ability as a runner or your weight, it's about making sure that muscle works more than anything.
Yeah, and it's important to recognise as well that incontinence is a massive barrier to exercise.
Yeah.
There's a PhD student called Amanda Gard who's doing some research in Dundee just now, and she's found that nearly 70% of active women, so women who are participating in gym activities now, worry about wetting themselves. So when we look at the obesity crisis, that has to be linked.
Heart disease.
These are women who are being active and looking after themselves. So what is stopping the rest of us? So yeah, it's a big question, and immediately if you're wetting yourself, get it seen to.
Okay, two here. Do you recommend pelvic floor stimulation trainers, and what do you think of Pelviva?
Yeah, there is a place for trainers that have got electrical stimulation in them, but make sure it's the right thing for you first, so get an assessment first. Pelviva's a gadget that you put, it's a bit like a tampon, but it works on Bluetooth, so it talks to your phone and you can see how you're squeezing on it, which is comedy gold. It's a good product because it's the only one that has a decelerator in it, so you can tell whether you're squeezing and lifting or pushing down. It's got its place. There isn't any evidence though that buying a gadget is more effective than just doing your pelvic floor exercises. There is though bit of anecdotal evidence that if you're prepared to spend some money on it, then you're more likely to do them for the period of time that's required, because it's such a long time. Remembering to do something for 3 times a day or even once a day for 3 to 4 months is quite difficult. So if you're a competitive person, then using apps or using gadgets and things can be really, really useful. But if that's out of your budget, then don't be disheartened.
No, there's loads out there that's not.
Yeah, come to the NHS and we'll fix you.
Thank you. Are there any educational tools for teenage girls to highlight their pelvic floors and stop problems before they occur?
There is. NHS Highlands and Islands produced a really excellent document for young women about their pelvic floor, and it's available, I think it's through the ACA, the Association of Continence Advisors, that it was published through. I will find out and put the link up for you.
I think it was brought into the Welsh curriculum as well.
Was it?
I think so, yeah. So there's some quite interesting PSHE style stuff.
Yeah, it was a really good bit of work because they did a lot of conversations with young women and trying to make sure that the language wasn't what my teenagers refer to as being boomer mum. So
here's another one. Are the cones good to buy?
they're okay, like they're fine. It's the same answer. They're fine for some women. For some women they'll be great, and for other women they're not going to make any difference because that's not the source of your problem. I had a woman come into clinic one time with a big Mary Poppins bag, and in it there must have been over £1,000 worth of fanny kit that she was just buying whatever she could find online in the hope that it might help her. And what she really needed was to have come 5 years earlier and got an assessment, because none of what she had bought was going to address her problem and she didn't need any of it. So it's much easier to press click and purchase than it is to take yourself to go and get an appointment. But really, for a starting point, you'll save yourself a lot of money and disappointment.
I'm just going to read with this one thing out, because we may get sort of cut off shortly because we're way over time, but thank you for brilliant advice. I have suffered for over 40 years with no help from my GP. Lucy, your book has given me the confidence and ammunition to get my GP to take me seriously.
Oh, I'm so pleased.
I
what I wanted to do.
I know. I think we better end there. We've got more questions. I think if people have got questions, it may be useful to send them into Wellbeing of Women, and we will send them on. I cannot say enough. Literally, everybody. I mean, we've got 40 or 50 comments here. Thank you. Brilliant session. You are both an inspiration. Thank you. This has been so useful and interesting. Somebody else is at a luncheon in Great Yarmouth. This is of interest to all ages. This has been great today. Hi, I love the chat, but please do keep me anonymous. We will. We're certainly not going to do anything like make you not anonymous. There's a lady actually who says that she's had 5 cycles of Botox. She finds the lack of explanation about the risks, if it works too well, shocking. She's needed to self-catheterize after 2 cycles, making the whole treatment worse than the problem. But it ends with a really positive, thank you for what you're doing. Thank goodness for this wonderful webinar. I mean, literally, all of them say the same thing. I just think that you both have been fantastic. You come at the challenge, at the problem, with such emotion, but with such humor, and being so pragmatic, with some really helpful tips, and actually just inspiring women to go and get help, and not to suffer in silence. This is the problem. I mean, that last one, suffering for over 40 years. I mean, I know it's making me well up.
And this is not about blaming. I'm so glad that finally you've been given permission to get some help, because you should.
Absolutely, yeah. Get down to your GP now, and you know, start by being referred, hopefully, to somebody as brilliant and as wonderful as Elaine. I am going to end it here. Just thank you, ladies. You are truly inspirational and wonderful. I do hope I'm going to be able to persuade you to do this pelvic floor exercise webinar. I have no idea how we're going to do it, but
we're pragmatic, we're creative women.
Yeah, we're going to get it done. I think it's lovely. I must say, in the office we do our pelvic floor exercises. One recommendation from one of my colleagues is to use Squeezy, is to use the NHS website. It is good. Start there, but really everybody needs to do their pelvic floor exercises. You have been truly inspirational. Thank you.
Thank you for having us.
No, thank you. I hope your book sells out, Lucy, because it's high time there was something like that. Yes, well done. Thank you very much. No, we've got details of where you can buy it. And thank you everybody who's come along to listen to you both. We really appreciate it. Please don't forget to donate. We really need your money. We don't know what applications we're going to get next, but there could be something on incontinence. There could be something on pelvic floor exercises. We don't know, but seriously, thank you very much. And goodbye. And we'll see you all soon. Okay.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye. Bye. Bye. Bye.
Bye.